Good evening and good morning. Welcome to this inaugural session on strategizing Indian AgTech at 75 at this fifth edition of the Global Dialogue on AgTech. The role of innovations and more importantly, their actual deployment is absolutely integral to accelerate the adoption of technology at the farm level. New technologies in agriculture, private investments, especially in R&D, and government efforts to rejuvenate the cooperative movement to address problems of small holdings are rapidly changing the face of agriculture in India. At this juncture, lessons from across the world also call for building a robust agri-tech policy framework in India, which includes collaboration between all market participants. Our session today will help us define the contours we need to navigate to build a technology-led growth strategy for agriculture to ensure resilience and sustainability. We have an extremely eminent set of speakers with us today. And to kick off the session today, I'd like to call on Mr. Sanjeev Puri, Chairman CI National Council Agriculture and Chairman and MD ITC to chair the session. Mr. Puri, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mitu. And good evening and good morning to all of you. On behalf of CII and on my own behalf, I welcome all of you to the Global Dialogue on Innovating at the Frontier from Agriculture to Agribusiness. This global conference is being organized under the umbrella of CII's Advanced Technology Program in Agriculture. I'm happy to mention that this is the fifth edition of the Global Dialogue. Over the years, the platform has contributed to strengthen the dialogue around advanced technology in India, and we will continue this endeavor. We're indeed delighted today to have with us today Dr. Abhilash Lekhi, Additional Secretary, Ministry of Agriculture and Farmers Welfare. In the last few years, the agriculture sector has witnessed path-breaking changes, very important policy interventions, and more specifically, targeted at data and leveraging technology. One such critical initiative has been the development of the digital infrastructure and agri-stack. This, supplemented by other policy thrusts like the formation of FPOs and the Agri-Infrastructure Fund, go a long way in redefining the future of agriculture in the country. In addition, we also have a very eminent panel with us today. We have amongst us Dr. Chintan Vaishnav, Director of the Atal Innovation Mission, Niti Aayog. Atal Innovation Mission is Government of India's flagship initiative to create and promote a culture of innovation and entrepreneurship across the length and breadth of the country. Professor Vikram Adve, Co-Director, Center for Digital Agriculture, University of Illinois, Director, AI Farms National AI Institute. Professor Adve is a renowned name in AgTech research arena and has done some exemplary work in the domain. Mr. Pramesh Shah, Global Lead Data-Driven Digital Agriculture World Bank, has joined us today. Mr. Shah is deeply involved in global programs on scaling up data-driven digital agriculture, and his expertise will be valuable in the Indian context as well. We also have amongst us Mr. Rajesh Ranjan, CEO, NAB Ventures Private Limited, and his experience in AgTech investment ecosystem will provide some unique perspectives and insights on the future prospects in this arena. Mr. Adarsh Baijal, Partner, Southeast Asia Digital Practice, Bain & Company, Singapore, has joined us today. His rich experience in technology and agribusiness vertical will be of immense importance today. I look forward to a very engaging discussion with the eminent panel that we have today. Just before I hand over to our eminent speakers, may I just set a context to this whole discussion. We're all aware that over the last few decades, the transformation of agriculture has been driven by the interventions of various types of technologies, from seeds to fertilizers to mechanization, amongst others. We're again at the threshold of another significant intervention that holds immense promise to transform agriculture, and that is the digital revolution, the power of data and the power of agri-tech. And it is very important to leverage this to deal with some of the very substantive challenge that is faced by agriculture today. As we know, the land holdings in India are fragmented. We have many small and marginal farmers. 70% of the rural households depend on agriculture for income. About half of India's workforce is engaged in agriculture, yet they account for about 17% of gross value added. This reflects the endemic challenges of productivity and income in this sector. Excuse me. The second, I think, important point to take note is that we have a serious challenge of climate change. And agriculture is most vulnerable to climate change. It is also contributed by way of GHG emissions, is the third most important sector as far as emissions are concerned in India. But it is also a victim of the large climate change. And we have witnessed huge amount of extreme weather events in India. And these events have increased in frequency, intensity, and devastation they have caused to agriculture over a period of time. So this is another very critical area on how agriculture can be transformed to adapt and become more resilient, and at the same time, what practices are required to reduce emissions. Third, I think agriculture is also important from a food security standpoint. In future, India is going to be home to, it's estimated that 1.5 billion people, most populous country. The world is also going to have 9.7, nearly 10 billion people over time. This calls for roughly 70 to 80% more agri-produce, given that by that time, the consumption will also improve. So, and we want to do this, and this has to be achieved in a situation where the soil, the natural resources are getting depleted. The soil is also in a much stressed condition. Water also is an item that is getting under severe stress, particularly in India, with 54% of India being water stressed. 90% of the fresh water resources in India are used by agriculture. And this is a sector thus that needs transformation if we are to solve the whole global issues of social inequity. The largest amount of poor people are actually in the agri-value chains in emerging economies. So this is very critical from that perspective. It is critical from food security, and it's the most vulnerable to climate change. And therefore, there are enormous challenges that we need to deal with. I believe digital is a powerful tool to do so. And I'm saying so by the conviction of our own experience. And I will just share very quickly 2 or 3 experiences. Right here during the pandemic, during the first lockdown, and that was a time when we were engaged with Niti Aayog in the 27 aspirational districts to train farmers in helping them improve incomes. Now, overnight, the education, the training capacity building had to be transformed from a physical mode to a digital mode through 5,000 WhatsApp groups, through special apps. And the number of farmers we engaged with is not small, is nearly 4 lakh farmers. And the results have been amazing. In fact, whatever milestones were set for the Kharif crops were achieved. So this is just an example to say India is ready and Bharat is ready for uptake on digital. And I think this credit goes to our Honorable Prime Minister and the government for the major initiatives under Digital India, for creating the digital literacy and also the digital backbone in the economy. And the economy was really prepared to adapt to this technology when the challenge happens. There are a couple of other examples, and these are earlier. Some time back, leveraging the ITC e-Chopal, which empowers 4 million farmers, we had launched the program called 12 Mahine Haryali, aligned to the Prime Minister's vision of doubling farmer incomes. And in a matter of couple of years, we were working with about over 200,000 farmers. About 30 to 35 of them reported doubling of incomes, and the others reported of improvement of incomes between 30 to 70%. And this was on the back of the the empowerment that the empowerment farmer received through the digital highway we had created as the each part. And similarly, we had also used this platform for empowering farmers on the right agronomy practices for resilience, what we call climate smart agriculture. And here again, we found that not only did GHG emissions reduce by 47%, but farmer incomes improved between 40 to 80%, really demonstrating that what is good for the planet is also good for the economy, it's also good for the farmer. And all this, although these are pilots, but these are pilots at scale, we have been able to do it in a short span of time because of the digital backbone. If you were to do these same farmer empowerment initiatives in a physical mode, I think it would have taken much longer, a lot more resources. And I also believe that the policy interventions that are being made by the government, the agriculture ministry, one on on the whole policy initiatives to build FPOs and the agri infrastructure funds, are going to make this process even faster, because with aggregation we can improve unit economics and train a larger ecosystem. I think this policy will certainly help us in accelerating change. And the second is, I think, the whole initiative to create the agri stack, because with agri stack, the scalability and replicability of all solutions that are being developed certainly gets enhanced. And I think the other area where private sector needs to play a role, and we and ITC are trying to do it through the ITC Mars. You see, there are 1,200 agri-tech startups today, but the farmer, to deal with his challenges, needs a very small selection of this, maybe 5, 7, or 10, that address the material challenges he faces in his locality, in his crop, and given the context of his weather. So how do you kind of pick up the right agri-tech point solutions, integrate them, and create a hyper-local solution for the farmers? And it has to be a scalable model, because we're dealing with large number of farmers. So we're trying to create a platform called the ITC Mars, which will integrate all these pieces through a technology engine and provide a hyper-local, personalized solution to each farmer. I think that's the piece where private sector needs to play a role. Now, these are, in my view, some of the key challenges that the sector faces, and the ways that we can some of the solution pathways that we need to look at. With these words, I will now hand over to Meetu for the rest of the proceedings. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Puri. And I think for creating that context in terms of, one, of course, the stress that we're working with when it comes to natural resources, social inequity that we have to work to address, but more importantly, the emphasis around adaptation and practice to overcome these and ensure that we work towards better and optimal outputs and farmer incomes, and how digital and AgTech is sort of really that silver lining that is showing that we can bring this at scale. With this, I would now like to invite Mr. Adarsh Bejal, who is the partner at Bain & Company of the Southeast Asia digital practice, and request him from his vantage point in terms of both innovation and enablers for scale to share with us his insights and the lessons that we can draw as we look at strategizing into the future. Adarsh, over to you.
Thanks a lot, Meetu and Mr. Puri, for a great opening and great context, and also very inspiring initiatives that ITC is running. I'm just going to share a few pages on how we see innovation in agribusiness more broadly, as well as our kind of thoughts on India. I can share from my vantage point, since I work across APAC as well as smallholder farmer ecosystems in Africa and LATAM. What transition that we see ahead. So first and foremost, let me know if you can see my pages, my slides well, and hear me well. First and foremost, I think the way that we would think about the transformation that's happening in the broader agri ecosystem is across with two lenses, what we call today forward and future back. Today forward is really around taking the technologies, the trends that we see today, and thinking about how they will evolve into the future, and what that will do to the broader ecosystem. And then future back is really looking at some of the very nascent trends, innovations that we see in the market, and imagining what the world would look like when they are at scale. So thinking about what the world would look like 10, 15 years in the future, and then looking back from there. So if we think about the broader changes in the agri-system globally, there would be three important ones that I would highlight. First is just disrupting the way agriculture is done, so disrupting traditional agriculture. And here I include everything from precision agri, AgTech services, further innovation in biotech, marketplaces, what we call farmer services platforms or digital platforms, which have a number of farmer services, all of the innovation in monitoring and analytics, as well as farm management. We're still very much farming the land and producing crop, but disrupting the way that we do that. The second big theme here is actually new farming models, and as well as what Mr. Puri alluded to at the opening around the importance of sustainability and how we embed that very, very deeply and fundamentally into the way that we farm. And here we include everything from vertical farming, controlled environment agriculture, regenerative agriculture, sustainability services, and of course carbon trading. You see some logos here just as illustrative players that are tapping that trend or building their business model around that trend, some from India, some globally. The last one is actually new food products itself. So changes in what we are producing and consuming. And this is very much in the domain of alternative proteins, alternative feed, ocean farming, and cell-based food, as well as just changing uses that traditional agri companies have. And these are very much going to transform the entire agri ecosystem. If you think about what will happen when they are at scale, they're starting to get to commercial viability, starting to scale up, but still a fraction of our total consumption or production. But if we kind of fast forward and think future back, when they are at scale, they will have a very, very dramatic impact on the broader ecosystem. All of this is underpinned, as we were hearing in the opening, by digital transformation. The amount of innovation that's happening via digital transformation in the ecosystem, both by private sector players, but also in the broader industry driven by government, is actually enabling a number of these. So that's the broader context of innovation in agribusiness. If I shift gears to kind of Indian agriculture, we think that there's going to be a pretty big transformation over the next decade or so, and that goes across a number of areas. I mean, just 5 mentioned here to get the kind of thinking going. But you can imagine across areas such as customers or farmers, going from a time of a limited awareness or education, particularly in terms of analytics, digital or kind of IoT on the farm and using farm data for agriculture, to significant usage and analytics penetration, and a tech native farmer that has a smartphone, that has broadband connectivity to actually get the most out of that. On inputs, from traditional cultivation methods to a lot more control monitoring, and then in the future, regenerative agricultures to preserve the soil, as we were talking about. And all through, whether it's machinery, whether it's channels, whether it's the way, funding is done for agriculture, we are actually at the cusp, and we'll see significant change and dramatic improvements over the next decade or two in the way that agriculture is done. And this is happening around the world. So India is by no means the only market where we are seeing these changes, but actually at the forefront in terms of the amount of innovation that's happening in the market. I look at smallholder ecosystems across the world, and India is right up there in terms of both the innovation as well as investments into new innovation in agribusiness. Just on that theme, we know that we've seen a boom in investments in agri-tech in India. We expect that will grow even further, get to multi-billion dollars in the next 5 years. But we've also started to now have several conversations with our clients that are looking to tap the opportunity here. And even with very simple and I would say now relatively conservative assumptions, this can be a very, very large market opportunity. So just on 3 dimensions, whether it's offtake, inputs, or logistics, And with some simple assumptions around penetration, you see 5% penetration on inputs or 8 to 10% penetration of digital in logistics, you start to see a fairly sizable market opportunity for new players that are using the digital transformation to create new business models for agriculture. So this is a very, very exciting market. We work with a lot of investors as well as global corporates that are actually looking across the region and thinking about where to invest. And a lot of the interest in India is because of this large opportunity that presents itself. Obviously, there are many, many challenges, but at the end of the day, it's a fundamentally different time that we are entering over the next decade. Maybe a couple of other thoughts. When we look at agri-businesses, we find actually several different models of business models that we see. And I thought this would be interesting to share as we think about the importance of both collaboration within the ecosystem as well as the stack that we are actually sharing. So I'll share five models here, of digital agri-businesses that we see around the world. The first is very much a farm tech platform. So there are a number of companies that are going down this path of saying, we can become platforms for all of the tech on the farm that leverages data, leverages intelligence, as well as smart kind of technologies built off of IoT solutions on the farm. And that's really to provide either peace of mind, so making life easier for farmers, bringing efficiency, or curated decision support. So there's a number of players going down this path, and obviously the data stack for farming that can be developed within an industry can be incredibly powerful to actually stimulate innovation on this direction. A second model, quite distinct, is what we call input marketplaces, where farmers are aggregating the demand for inputs to bring economies of scale. They also get access to the right inputs, high quality inputs at the right time on their doorstep. This is very much built off of the thinking of how watching e-commerce take off across the world and thinking about how that applies for a farmer. And inputs obviously being the primary consumption for the farmer in terms of buying goods and services for farming. A third model, which we see, is what we call an information platform. This is a content-heavy platform that can act as a one-stop shop for trusted advice for the farmer. A number of players that are pursuing this in the world actually do this with an integrated social component or a social network component, where you're creating peer-to-peer networks between farmers to actually bring the community discussions and the neighbor discussions in the villages online. And we expect this to be a big component of how the Indian ecosystem actually takes off. A fourth one is off-take platforms, and typically the value pools are the largest on these platforms in many of the smaller markets. And these are really sales and marketing platforms for farmers to get the highest value for their produce. Interestingly enough, the really kind of powerful innovations here are actually where this is combined with creating new value for customers, whether it's in terms of bringing high quality output from the farmers to customers, whether it's bringing new outputs from the farmers to the customers that allows them to create value for end consumers, whether it's in the form of traceability or new products actually. And then finally, as we were hearing about eChoupal as well, there are a number of integrated kind of platforms in the market that will bring together components across the first four and other services into one platform. And of course, these can be seen as 360-degree kind of solutions for farmers. And if you fast forward or think about how these might evolve in the future, you can imagine the entire rural kind of commerce ecosystem existing online and taking place online, where there's a free-flowing goods and services or even labor on these digital platforms to make life much easier for farmers than it is today, where there are many bottlenecks in the way that they conduct their farming. So when we think about how digital is transforming the agri ecosystems, we are seeing all of these models and nuances on these models emerging around the world, be it in Africa, in Southeast Asia, India, or Latin America. And they have the smallholder ecosystems where there are larger groups of smallholder farmers have a unique kind of nuance to them. And there's a lot of innovation happening ground up, which are solutions designed specifically for smallholder ecosystems. And I believe that's really one of the areas where the Indian ecosystem is going to kind of power ahead and create solutions for the world, because we are solving problems for a very, very specific fragmented farming landscape, and that can be deployed in a number of markets outside India as well. Obviously, there are many challenges that need to be resolved here, and number one is just cost for many of these platforms to make the model work, because the buyer is a relatively poor individual farmer with a small holding. Cost to serve and cost to acquire is very, very high, and that's what makes it pretty challenging. And that's where I think the opportunity to collaborate in the ecosystem, the opportunity to create systemic solutions, as India has in terms of fintech, and create a kind of a stack, can be very, very useful to unlock a lot more innovation, a lot more growth in terms of digital farming. Maybe I will just end with one thought, and many of you would have heard this quote, famous quote from Bill Gates around overestimating the change that will occur in the next 2 years and really underestimating the change that will occur in the next 10. I'm a strong believer in this, and there are many difficult challenges that we have for digital transformation in agribusiness in India. But a lot of that, when we are 10 years out, we will look back and think about how we never estimated how big the impact could be from some of this innovation, and how the ecosystems could really transform themselves. Thanks a lot for the opportunity to share with all of you.
Thank you so much, Adarsh. And I think, one for so sharply calling out the digital multiplier, but also I think the innovation models we've seen even through this morning, a lot happening on both on the input marketplace and the offtake platforms. And I think, with technology and information, people are still grappling with scale and trust. And as we sort of start to unlock those, I think we'll have a much stronger foundation to be able to drive more equitable change. Thanks so much for setting that context, Adarsh. Thank you. I'd like to now invite Mr. Rajesh Ranjan, CEO, NAB Ventures. Mr. Ranjan has extensive experience in working with early and middle stage, ventures, and brings to us a lot more experience in terms of what is happening in the Indian context when it comes to startups and established ventures. So it'll be very interesting to hear his views on what needs to be done to be able to help, handhold and really smoothen that journey. Over to you, Mr. Ranjan.
Thank you, Mituji. Thanks for giving us the opportunity, and thank you, Mr. Puri. Absolutely insightful views and practical experiences from the real world. And thank you, others, for painting the macro picture a little bit more clearly. Without much ado, I would like to share my screen. And Mituji, please confirm if it does not move after the first slide. So just let me know. So, right. So, thinking about strategizing Indian AgTech at 75, I put together a few slides. Before that, very quickly, we are NAB Ventures Fund, the best performing AgTech food tech fund in India. In a short span of time, we have outperformed our peers both in public sector as well as in private sector. We focus on AgTech, food tech, agri-rural fintech, and in rural tech, whichever tech-enabled rural businesses, edutech, health tech, or e-commerce, and the likes. Did the slide move, Mituji? I'm on slide number 2.
Yes, it's moving.
Okay, thank you. Great. So I think Mr. Puri captured it very well. I'll just not repeat the macro points, but very quickly, some of the macro changes which are taking place in India, increasing income levels, evolving demographics. India is a young country as compared to the developed world. Increasing urbanization, increasing preference for branded items, processed foods, modernizing retail, and increasing food exports. So these changes of themes, when you mix it with the growth in population, 27 crore people will get added by 2050. So almost 1.6 billion people. That would require a 70% increase in food, and that has to happen in a less carbon-based energy consuming things, more of decarbonization, fewer agrochemicals, preferably bio, lower GHGs or emissions, and we have to manage climate change, wonderfully covered by Mr. Puri already. Some data points that last year, despite pandemic, agriculture and allied services were the only sectors which outperformed, which grew actually, while GDP went down. And GVA, which is gross value added from agri, forestry, and fishing, was 272 billion. This is FY21 ending March, which is 20% of India GVA, which actually agriculture increased its share in Indian GVA. And agri credit to the tune of 208 billion was disbursed last year, FY21. Absolutely, NABARD has had an important role to play in it. Though I feel that proper channelization, better targeting can be done on the lending side. As compared to the number that you look at the right bottom, $888 million were invested between 2012 and 2022. These are calendar years. So not even 1% of the agri credit came in the form of equity. And this is VC investments primarily, not counting PEs or buyouts, right? So there is a pressing need to do more of equity investments and discover equity as an asset class for AgTech. So certainly, I mean, a lot of funds are making efforts, both specialists like us as well as generalist funds. And in the years to come, certainly with Bain's forecast of $30 to $35 billion digital economy in AgTech, I think that can become a reality in times to come. Now, quickly onto the key challenges. Again, I put some of the markers in red. Water stress in many states, lack of availability of farm level weather data, macro area coverage through satellites, not micro. There is overuse of agri inputs, as you can see at the bottom, subsidized, spurious quality, so that's more or less, if I were to break it into three buckets: agri inputs, on-farm interventions, and farm output, right? And then data, which covers data and finance, cover all the divides. So inputs on the farm, there are many challenges: low yielding seed varieties, disguised unemployment, low usage of farm equipment other than tractor, labor shortage, pressing problem now, soil quality test not happening in time. And then coming to market linkage, which is where Government of India made a great effort in terms of allowing farmers to sell right at the farm gate. But we've seen the reality, which has not happened. But quite unfortunate. I think it was a great effort on the market linkage, because lack of market access results in low income realization by small and marginal farmers, and low processing, high waste. We've seen all of that. Lack of storage and marketing infra near farms, mandi information not happening in a timely manner, real-time manner, and limited access to formal credit, mostly through PSU bank lending, using Kisan credit cards for farmers, and crop insurance. None of the private sector players have been able to scale up. It's primarily government run. So a lot of areas which can be looked at from a scale-up point. So these challenges, to my mind, present a lot of opportunities for a multi-decade growth in agriculture. So I'll add some more in the red. Lack of data, data-driven planning. One of the panelists will talk about it. But there is lack of real-time data-driven planning for agriculture, emanating primarily due to lack of data on real-time individual farmers for each farm, and crop zone. These three. So IDEA is going to be a great initiative from Government of India to kind of get that right. And agri equipment's used, there is lack of data, crops harvested, pest attacks, there is no history which is being captured, output stored in warehouses, cold storage in real time not available, logistics availability. Some startups are getting there, but it's very, very nascent stage at this point. And there's no estimation of agri-produce demand from B2B, B2C, and D2C buyers. So as I said, each of these challenges present huge innovation and investment opportunities for startups. So very quickly, before I jump into the tech-based solutions, I would like to, bifurcate the agri-techs in India into core agri-tech and peripheral agri-tech. Core AgriTech is where the startups are using new age technologies like AI, ML, computer vision, agri-biotech, blockchain, IoT, etc. for a large part of their business. For example, two of our portfolio companies, Satyuk, which is into agri-satellite data analytics, near real time, does root zone soil moisture measurement in real time. Krishi Tantra, which does rapid soil testing in 30 minutes and also provides predictive services, including agronomy. And then peripheral agri-tech, which are digital interfaces for produce distribution, trading, aggregation, input selling, and app-based, say agri-logistics included. Some of the examples would be Ninja Cart, Lysius. What India needs really today is more of core agri-tech. Peripheral, I mean, it's great, but it does not make money at this point in time. A lot of players won't make money. Same the story for core agri-tech, but I think what is directly going to benefit farmers from an yield increase perspective would certainly be core agri-tech players. So now coming to the tech opportunities that we see, again, three buckets on the left-hand side, on the farm, and the right-hand side. Left-hand side, as you can see, AgriStack, digital land database, farmer, cropping, all three and more combined with Jan Dhan, Aadhaar, mobile is going to be a winner. So, and over a period of time, more data can be captured on individual farms and farmers, and that's where it gels with the vision of Mr. Sanjeev Puri when he says that hyper local, customized solutions for each farmer. That's the need of the hour, certainly. And agri inputs and agronomy platforms at the bottom. So these are peripheral agri-tech. It's doing well. As you can see, the bull is rampaging at this point in time, thanks to low interest rate environment. And on the top right, as you can see, there is market linkage, and there is farm ERP, there is market info and data exchange. By the way, big data can make a lot of difference out there in terms of making available real-time data on many parameters across agriculture. And then there is crop insurtech and agri-fintech, which cuts across all three buckets. So I have not touched upon the center, which is the land that you see. There, why I put things in the red, because none of them make money. IoT sensors don't make money, not able to scale up, not economical. Farm weather stations, not happening. Farm robotics, very expensive. Farmers cannot buy. Their income levels don't justify owning them. So certainly there is a need for subscription-based services. Smart irrigation, again, we have not even touched the surface, despite knowing about water stress in many states. Uber for farm equipment, none of the startups make money. A lot of them are exiting the business. Rapid produce quality testing, again, it's a sorry state of affairs. They are looking at becoming market linkage players after doing the produce quality testing. Indoor vertical farming, not happening in India for next 2-3 years, some time away. The macro picture looks great from a distance, but once you pierce the wheel, then you start realizing that a lot of these things have to be looked at from the prism of cost benefit, whether they are economical, whether they are viable propositions, or are we creating Uber, Ola kind of solutions, which, let's say, if they stop, don't make money, then we can't go back to the yellow, black taxis also. So we are playing with fire out here. But as long as the market is permissive, the interest rate environment remains low. Peripheral agri-tech at the moment is leading and attracting a lot of dollars. But once the cycle turns, and it is going to turn very quickly, given the fact that inflation is rearing its ugly head, not only in India, but globally, I think going forward, funding for non-viable startups, platforms, if you will, is going to be challenging. So that's where, even though the opportunity is huge, absolutely, right? So again, core and peripheral, a little bit more on the core. You can see crop genomics. We don't come across startups which actually are working in that area. Gene edited, not allowed in India. So there is a lot of scope to this. Is different from gene modified seeds. It is very different. So these are the areas which India certainly needs to increase its crop productivity, crop yields, and feed the population. 27 crore likely to be added by 2050. Animal genetics, again, a great area to work with. Bioagri inputs instead of the chemical ones. And farm imagery needs to be better. Precision agriculture, farming as a service. Some of the startups have started working on that, but scaling up big time, it's not happening. But I think some of them are getting the models right. Farm monitoring, again, whether it's done through drones or satellites. Satellites at this point are cheaper. Farm ERP, then scaling up, but very slowly. So sum and substance, the point that I'm trying to make is that India certainly needs better mechanisms to support core agri-tech. Peripheral at this point is funded, doesn't make money, but at least it has access to capital. The core agri-tech startups are the ones which we need to worry about and do something. As you can see, quality assessment, they have moved to market linkage. Uber for farm equipment, again, only the well-funded, let's say, backed by Mahindra or maybe ITC can survive. Tough, a long haul for them. So there is a tug of war going on between high innovation companies and high working capital companies. High working capital is peripheral agri-tech, a lot of platforms that it looks nice to talk about. They don't make money. And they will never, some of them will not make money for the next 3, 4, 5 years. As long as working capital, as in equity is substituting for working capital, actually, it's going to be tough going forward in a high interest rate environment. So while the challenge on high innovation models, which are core agri-tech, the soil testing, on-farm interventions, quality produce testing, smart irrigation, all of that, will standalone models survive there? Or they need to be, they are better off merging or partnering with the platform companies which have at least control over the consumer or access to consumers. So it's AgTech in India is like a barbell, wherein on the right-hand side are the customer-facing, consumer-facing startups, and on the left-hand side are the agri-input-facing companies, startups, right? So both ends make money. Bigger, of course, is the one peripheral one closer to the consumer, but in between it's a thin bar, and which is core agri-tech. But that's what is needed here. So there are VCs who have made enough money on peripheral agri-tech, while there are VCs struggling who have funded core agri-tech, not able to exit some of these businesses. So coming back to funding over the last 8 years, it's still 2020. As you can see in red, biotech 1% of the $888 million, seeds and agrochemicals 3%, agri-equipments 2%, real-time data dissemination 1%, satellite data for agri 1%, FAS, which is farming as a service, including SaaS, 2%, quality assessment 1%, agri-equipment 3%. And a lot of the dollars have actually gone to players like Licious, Fresh to Home, or the likes of guys doing F&B, right? And last calendar year, that is, you can see the 0% very clearly standing out. Ag biotech 0% investment, agri equipment none, rental for agri equipment none, real-time data dissemination 0, enterprise software 0. So the point that I'm trying to make is that high innovation is not attracting the VC money, and so somebody has to step in. Either the private sector, large corporates, government has to step in to support some of these initiatives, which, by the way, Niti Aayog through AIM is doing a great job in terms of supporting the incubation centers, which support some of these startups. But large dollars continue to elude them. And there is a fair amount of hype versus reality. So as you can see, there's a Gartner chart. So innovation trigger, when something innovative comes, let's say nano satellites, there's a lot of hype, expectations get built in. And I'm reminded of Bill Gates' quote, 2 years, next 2 years, it gets overstated, right? The expectations. So nano satellites are probably in that stage. And then once you cross the peak of inflated expectations, we have seen it with drones, did not take off. Imagery did not take off. On-farm sensors did not take off. Uber for tractors, people are struggling. And then slowly over a period of time, when the disillusionment sets in, then people start realizing that maybe a platform like D2C could be a better bet. A platform which combines, which others hinted about, combines input, agronomy, fintech, and output, probably makes money. Jury is still out. So have we found the AgriTech investment holy grail? Has tech adoption happened at scale? We are all aware about technology and what it can do, but adoption is not happening. Less than 5 to 10%. Ask the farmer. Hinterland, there is no change which has happened. They need actually frugal innovations, mass innovations. They actually don't need some of these peripheral AgTech, really, honestly. So for them, core AgriTech is what they need, or mass innovations which are not funded by VC. So we need to rethink the funding model to get to $35–30 billion of digital market for AgriTech. Or is it tsunami behavior? Things go wrong way first. So waters first recede and then come back. So maybe waters have receded for core AgriTech, and probably it will come back in vogue at some point in time when reality sets in that peripheral AgriTech does not make money, most of it. So the way forward, basically new viability funding mechanism needs to be devised for core AgriTech, channelizing CSR money, probably local state governments, which Telangana, Karnataka, other governments are working really hard on that. Investment companies with 10-year holding periods instead of impact funds who actually have very limited patience, 5-year holding period. I think it's time to start investment companies focused on startups which are core for India, and they can have 10 to 15-year holding periods. Capital markets, new instruments, maybe convertible grants, which is practiced in Israel, where if the startup does well above a certain limit, then equity, the grant converts into equity stake, so that it's a win-win for the grant giver as well as for the startup. Structured bonds, which have flexible repayment schedules, higher incubation, acceleration support from incubation, acceleration centers, because let's say incubation center is able to give only 25 lakhs, which is most of the time it's not adequate funding support. So maybe we should look at larger grants, larger support, financial support or equity support that is from incubation or acceleration. By the way, there are very few acceleration centers in India. We are doing a great job in incubation, but the money is mostly being used for setting up the infra for incubation centers. Maybe they should ride on or leverage the infrastructure which is already in place. Universities have it, many PSUs have their grand training centers. Those can be used. And so the point that I'm trying to make is more dollars can be given to startups directly at a very early stage when they need the money. Post proof of concept or just to get to the proof of concept level. Increased involvement of Indian agri-food corporates like ITC, M&M, and probably more corporate venture capital arms, which I don't see many of them in India today. So those are the way forward. And a higher expenditure on R&D and innovation, easier said than done, but certainly worth a try. Larger grant sizes from places like BIRAC for Ag Biotech and so on. Horizontal AgTech platforms, big data companies to partner with fragmented or standalone core AgTech solutions to improve viability of core AgTech solution providers, and which Mr. Puri touched upon. FPOization, which is collectivization of Indian farms. Only 5 to 7% of farmers are currently organized under FPOs. So GOI has done the right thing by announcing creation of 10,000. I think more FPOs. I think more would certainly be needed. We need, I think, more than 50% of farmers should be collectivized. And I think there are some problems in the FPO structure. They can't raise equity and so on. So those can be certainly looked at some point. Better regulation of market linkage companies. Are we really creating digital adithyas or intermediaries instead of the so many intermediaries out there? Or because we don't have data to say that because let's say a platform, aggregation platform came, let's say a Ninja Cart came, then that farmer's share of income from sale of farm produce has really gone up. So there is no way to track, by the way, the revenues of some of these startups. There is no GST, for example, right? Even in bond markets or equity markets, when we go, we see we have to pay.
So Rajan, sorry to interrupt. Request if you could try and wrap up shortly as we're running a little over time. Sorry to interrupt.
Absolutely, thank you. So, for example, in stock market, we have securities transaction tax, 0.01%. So, I think something of that sort can be explored for government to track the revenues of market linkage providers and also track how much is actually going to the farmers. So that brings me to the end. Thank you, Meeta ma'am, and thank you for your patient hearing, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Ranjan. I think a very sobering presentation in terms of also point of reflection for us as we look at the challenges that core agri-tech is facing in terms of more investment and the wallet share in terms of investment that it gets. But also some very thoughtful suggestions in terms of instruments that we could look at to being able to catalyze this investment. Thank you so much for sharing your insights on that front. We now make a segue to a very interesting aspect, and I think one which is extremely relevant to all of us is around the usage of data. And we have with us Mr. Parmesha from the World Bank to be able to talk to us, as we think protocols, as we think interoperability. These are the aspects that we will grapple with when it comes to scale, and we would benefit enormously from your perspective, Mr. Shah. Over to you.
Thanks, Meetu. And it's difficult to follow Ranjan, basically, because he has laid down the whole sort of provocative kind of way of looking at the sector itself. But I'll bring a global perspective to this and draw implications for India. So as Meetu says that when we did a global research on what's happening to AgTech across the world, we find that all the startups are spending 75% time on collecting data and developing algorithms out of it, and only 20% time on developing products and services, and only 5% on going to scale. And so data is a very important public good, or a quasi-public-private good. If we don't tackle that, the AgTech sector would not grow significantly. It's not a question of just having data, but also having analyzed data and actionable intelligence. That proportion of actionable intelligence in the sector is very low right now, which doesn't allow deep, in AgTech to really emerge from that. And Ranjan is right in saying that the core agri-tech is important, and that will only go, core agri-tech can only grow if the data part is resolved. And I think what government's trying in terms of data stack, I think again, the challenge there would be that if it's only market facing, because data is a lot of things. It's crop data, it's weather data, it's transaction data. So I think the question is, how do we get this data converted into actionable intelligence so that AgTechs can start from a different starting point and spend more time on developing products and services, as opposed to spending a lot of time on just doing data algorithms and analytics. And so the starting point could be different. So you could lead to a deep tech there. So I think that's a very important investment which is required. And I think as World Bank, if we look at globally, we have decided that we will make at least 5% of the investments we make in physical agriculture input services, we will make at least 5% on data, because we think it's as important as any physical infrastructure for future, basically. So I think that's very important, and government's going in the right direction to do that. But it's not enough to build data in that sense, because you also need to digitize a lot of part. So I think the 4 or 5 things we have found very useful is farm registries, farmer registry, digitizing that, and then also digitizing a number of devices which are used in agriculture. Whether you have processing devices, whether you have mechanization devices, all the devices need to talk to each other. And if these are digitized, then you will get a very different efficiency paradigm coming out of that. So digitization is very important. Something we see in India, that storage, warehouse, logistics, these data, these devices and these points don't talk to each other. The assets are currently not being utilized extremely well. We have tons of tractors, tons of storage, tons of FCI go downs, but no one knows what's happening to each of them. And you don't have systems which let people know where these things stand at this stage. Neither the private sector is able to use them well, nor the public sector is able to use it internally well. So I think those are very important investments, I think, in terms of digitizing all our kind of set of devices there. So data, digitization, devices. And then finally, I think what Ranjan is referring to is the innovation ecosystem. I think we don't have accelerators in India. considering the size of population of smallholders we have, considering the size of market opportunities, the number of accelerator per unit of farm would run into 0.00003. So I think we need, you saw that in the whole how software as a service was developed. It was developed because you needed a lot of acceleration was happening in terms of innovation. So we have a lot of incubation, but very little acceleration. So I think you have everyone staying at a kind of a point at which people are not able to accelerate there. So I think we need a sandbox, innovation sandbox, because as Ranjan is saying, things are failing, they will fail. We need to learn rapidly and then move on to things which are working and which are not working. So I think if we are now working with a lot of central banks in developing a dedicated sandbox on AgTech, and I think in India also we need a dedicated sandbox now, which will allow us to learn rapidly and to try many innovations there. And what I would say that we need more innovations. It's not that we don't need innovations, but we need more patient capital. And I think as we say that a lot of these innovations in the core agri-tech will not happen in the private good sense, we will have to create some kind of a public-private kind of a model for financing this as we go forward to do that there. So I think innovation ecosystem, investment in that as a quasi-public-private good is required, because smallholders are not an investable proposition right now, because the farmer acquisition cost is high and no one will be able to go to each smallholder farmer and acquire them. FPOs are a good kind of thing. If all FPOs get digitized from day one, I think we can have a very different model, because FPOs also, if they remain non-digitized, they will not be able to really become, you can't take the advantages of economies of scale if they are not digitized there. So I think it is important to digitize even the farmer side of it. And a lot of farmer FPOs could digitize from day one, then AgTechs could collaborate with them. And you can see a very new formulation coming up, where AgTechs, digitized FPOs, and the large agribusiness like ITC and Mahindra and all could also build a kind of a outreach model, which is very different. Now, see what's happening globally. Pinduoduo in China, which is even a large e-commerce player than what you call it Alibaba in the agriculture phase, has built a kind of an end-to-end platform where farmers can display their product and photographs. Each farmer has a portal on the e-commerce platform. They are able to demonstrate what products they have. They are able to, what quality products they are producing. Someone goes and vets that, and then you get a quality rating of a farmer there. And then you go to the customers there, and customers can also aggregate their demand, and then they can talk with farmers in a very different way. So I think e-commerce companies and agribusiness companies also have a big responsibility to build platforms. I think point solutions will die after 5 or 10 years. Each point solution has no viability, as Ranjan is also saying. I think bundled and platform solutions are going to be there. A smallholder, if he runs to someone else for input, someone else for finance, and someone else for markets, is not going to be able to use AgTech in a strategic way. So we are finding globally that the people who are able to have more impact, efficiency, are the ones where you are bundling various kinds of services, transactions on one platform. And I think in places where they are not doing it, in Africa and Latin America, we are promoting development of these platforms as part of a public good investment. Basically, we are really working with certain governments, Brazil, Argentina, Mexico, Kenya, Morocco, all these governments to really develop these platforms where people can come in and bundle their services, because point solutions will not be viable on your own. You can't have a weather service product and then it will make money. It will not make money because smallholders will not buy subscription services. Unlike Latin America, where commercial farmers are buying these services, smaller holders are not buying subscription services all over the world. So we will have to come with a model which bundles services, transactions, and lots of other 3-4 things into one. The final thing I would like to say is also we need some amount of fintech and agri-tech has to come together. So we are looking at how we can build all the fintechs to diversify into agri-tech. Because if agri-tech is going to start from scratch, fintech has already built a platform. So how do we build a synergistic agri-tech and a fintech sector, which we are calling agri-fintech as we go along, is important to develop there. So I think that's also important on how we can learn from fintech and then use some of those examples in agri-tech. But we are very positive. I am not that pessimistic as Ranjan in that sense, because I think we have a critical mass of startups in India who have the potential to become global kind of players. Actually, I can tell you today that 16 of the startups in India are now working in more than 28 countries globally. So already they're going global. The reason they are going global because they're not becoming viable in India. And so we have to create conditions in India for them to become more viable there, because they become viable by going across to Africa and Latin America. In fact, a lot of them are working across continents, across our programs, they are working there. So their innovations are very powerful. But we need to build an acceleration ecosystem in India. Acceleration is a very important part. And so I think, but it's difficult to make public good investments in this space because ministries of agriculture traditionally don't have a kind of a data and a digital thinking. So we have now looking at, it's very good to have a chief digital officer in Ministry of Agriculture in India. It's a good development. But they need a very strong group within the ministry, which should include a lot of people coming from the technology space, a lot of coming from the venture capital space to be there, so that there is a real AgTech policy developed for India. I think we don't have an AgTech policy currently well developed in terms of what we will do in different things. So I am optimistic that all the things we are hearing, there could be a next generation of innovation there. But the data stack, very good investment. I think we need to invest that, but the accelerator ecosystem is something which is missing in India, which we should invest in. I'll stop, Meetu. Thank you very much for inviting.
Thank you so much, Mr. Shah. And also, I think for some of those, building on this, the provocative thinking in terms of looking at how we really bring in patient capital and create the right kind of sandbox environment to learn rapidly and to be able to also try and experiment with the different solutions. I think more importantly, the importance of bundling and platforms, which will be critical as we take these things to scale. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts with us. I'd like to now invite upon Professor Vikram Adve, the work that he's doing at the University of Illinois and in the area of artificial intelligence and digital agriculture, I think will help show us a mirror into the future in terms of what the possibilities are and energize us all to be able to sort of look at what segues we can pivot to be able to harness that potential that Mr. Shah also alluded to. Over to you, Professor Adve.
Thank you, Meetu. I'm just going to share my screen. Let me know if you can't see it. I assume you can see that. First, thank you very much to Sanjeev and Adarsh and Ranjan and Parmesh. I think that it was really exciting to hear the amazing range of different ideas, technologies, innovations that are being considered. There are important challenges, of course, and I thought it was quite eye-opening for me to hear about the current situation in India. I'm really coming at this problem from, I think in some sense, a different direction, come at it from the point of view of academic research and so a somewhat longer term perspective. As Meetu said, I'm the director of an AI institute here at Illinois. This is one of a number of different national AI institutes that was set up by the US government, federal funding agencies. We are funded by the US Department of Agriculture. And the goal of our institute is to develop AI technologies that have applications in the agriculture domain, and in particular that aim to solve problems that in particular maintain productivity, aim for higher productivity, but at the same time try to do that while being environmentally sensitive and sustainable and profitable for farmers, including very smallholder farmers. that balance of productivity and sustainability is not easy, and environmental resilience, I should add, is not easy. And many of the problems and challenges that we tackle are aimed at trying to achieve that balance. We have about 45 researchers and educators across 7 institutions. I won't take you through the whole list of people or problems that we're tackling. This is a very high level, sort of 20,000 foot perspective on what we are trying to do. But at the bottom here, this is sort of a schematic diagram of the way that we organize our work. At the roots of this image here on the right are a number of foundational AI research challenges that apply to many different domains, not just agriculture, but which we believe have important roles to play in tackling agriculture problems. Just as one example, I'll talk about the small data problem, which is that for many problems in agriculture today, if you want to develop machine learning models or AI models, gathering data is not the limiting factor. In fact, there tends to be a large amount of data available, but curating the data, as Paramesh just said, labeling the data to be able to train machine learning models, these are very expensive, time-consuming steps. And one of our research goals is to try and greatly minimize the time and effort required in training machine learning models using large data sets without labeling effort. And then we try to use these foundational AI techniques to develop AI-based solutions for a wide range of agricultural problems up at the top, like disease prediction and high throughput phenotyping to do breeding of better seeds, or predicting soil nutrient fluxes through soils in order to monitor environmental impacts of fertilizers and herbicides and others. And so there are this diagram is sort of somewhat misleading in the sense that a lot of the work is really at the top. A smaller fraction is at the bottom, but the fraction at the bottom is foundational to the research. And our work is organized around 6 thrusts. I won't really spend too much time talking about the details of these because it's a short talk. But broadly, we explore problems in autonomous farming. So, for example, the use of robots, drones, IoT, and edge machine learning and edge processing in order to reduce to scale up the precision and management practices for agriculture to make them much more sustainable without requiring more people, more labor. The second up at the top is labor optimization for livestock management, and in particular, how small groups of farmers can manage large livestock operations, which is really very, very difficult to do today. The third is environmental resilience, and in particular, how modern agriculture can be much more resilient to especially climate change impacts like elevated ozone, elevated carbon dioxide, water stress, drought stress, as well as the opposite problem, which is how you can reduce the impact of agriculture on the environment. And then the fourth thrust at the bottom is optimizing soil health, and in particular, how we can monitor nutrient flows in soils, how we can track and minimize the use of chemical fertilizer and herbicide in order to maximize soil health. And all of these are based on a foundation of the AI research problems I mentioned earlier. We also have the 2 cross-cutting thrusts at the bottom. One is on economics research and technology adoption and public policy, how we can maximize the adoptability of advanced technologies in farming, and including both smallholder and larger scale farms. And a strong education and outreach thrust, including some remote learning capabilities and online courses, which if anyone in the audience is interested in learning more about these, I would be very happy to talk to you about it offline. But we have a number of online courses, certificates, and soon we will have a master's degree in digital agriculture, all available online for people anywhere around the world. So that's really all I'm going to say about the work we're doing in AI farms. But deriving from our research, our experience, and in some sense looking forward, I wanted to say a little bit about I think the priorities for developing economies, both from a policy and also investment perspectives, because I believe that there is a real opportunity for developing economies. There are obviously major challenges because of the fragmentation of agriculture, the small size of farm holdings in many parts of the developing world, including much of India. But this also creates an opportunity, and that's what I wanted to emphasize in the rest of the talk. In particular, what the opportunity that I see is that through the judicious use of low cost and what we call scale neutral technologies, and I'll explain what I mean by that in a few minutes. Through the use of these, I think we can, an economy can enable sustainable and profitable and productive agriculture. And the sustainability is a key part of that. It's not just productivity, but sustainability as well. And moreover, the technologies can help to motivate young people to make careers in agriculture because the work becomes more exciting, less labor intensive, more challenging, more intellectually challenging. Just to contrast this with the state of agriculture today in the developed world, industrialized agriculture and what's sometimes called monoculture farming, where very, very large farms of hundreds of thousands of hectares are devoted to a single crop through a whole growing season. This approach to farming depends heavily on very large equipment, and that very large equipment can only work on very large farms, and therefore that in turn creates a demand for very large equipment, and so you get this sort of vicious self-reinforcing cycle, which has a number of major harms. So it does increase productivity and profitability, but it comes at very serious costs. For example, there's severe erosion in many parts of the most productive sections of the United States, in many parts of the European Union. And there are paper after paper that have studied and documented the impact of this kind of industrialized agriculture on soil erosion and soil health. Another major example in many parts of the world is the impact on water pollution from nitrate runoff. And so the diagram here on the bottom right shows in the United States, the watershed of the Mississippi Delta in yellow, causing nitrate and for fertilizer in general, fertilizer runoff all the way down to the Gulf of Mexico down at the bottom. And that light blue area that you see, there is an area where wildlife has been depleted severely, and fisheries are very badly harmed because the fertilizer runoff has killed wildlife because they cause hypoxic zones in the waterways. And it's driven directly by overuse of fertilizers in industrialized agriculture. Another major impact of monoculture is herbicide-resistant weeds. So the chart on the left, the map on the left there shows for many countries around the world the number of weed species that have become resistant to herbicides because of overuse of herbicides. And you can see that the United States is the worst by far. It's the darkest color in the middle. But many other countries are impacted as well, including Canada and many parts of South America, China. India is starting to get bad, but it still has some opportunity to reduce this problem. And this number of the real problem here is basically the use of chemicals. Weeds evolve to become resistant to chemicals, and industrialized agriculture cannot avoid this because you really cannot do weeding at large scale on large scale farms without some kind of broad chemical application. More broadly, there are a number of other problems in industrialized agriculture, like freshwater depletion, which is a widespread problem in India, as you all know. It's a really major problem for economic problem for smallholder farmers because they simply cannot afford the investments that are required in large equipment and chemicals and fertilizers and data-driven farming. Also, there are surprisingly poor nutritional outcomes in industrialized agriculture because the nature of the food supply really overemphasizes certain produce, certain very heavy use of antibiotics and others in livestock, which partly is what enables poor people to afford the food that they eat, but it also greatly harms the nutritional outcomes for many people. And that's really another major consequence of industrialized agriculture that is underappreciated. So the opportunity here is the opposite, is to take a longer term strategic view of how investment and government policy can avoid the harms of industrial agriculture, in particular through certain improved technologies. And there are a number. So first, one point I want to make here is that there's a virtuous cycle that you can enable by focusing on smaller scale farms and appropriate use of technologies on these farms through mixed cropping or intercropping, and in particular the use of smaller equipment, which is much more economically suitable for small farms. And small farms can then enable more environmentally friendly agriculture practices, which can benefit from the small equipment. And this approach to farming can lead to healthier soils, greatly reduced chemical usage, much more effective weed control at smaller scales through mechanical weeding rather than chemical weeding, and approaches that require less indiscriminate use of fertilizers and herbicides, which is much more benign to the environment and potentially also reduces water usage. And broadly speaking, this is now economically beneficial to smallholder farmers because they can afford the scale of investment and equipment, and also take advantage of labor when it's available. It also, this is the converse of the point I made on the last slide, which is that in this approach to farming, you can really end up with much better nutritional outcomes from the food produced. But in order to accomplish this and still maintain the productivity, the aggregate productivity that we need to feed a large and growing population, you really need appropriate technologies. You need low-cost technologies that are suitable for small-scale farming. And so we use the term scale neutral to describe such technologies that are equally affordable at both small and large scales, and in particular can span the spectrum from small to medium to large farms. And so I'm showing an example here in the video on the right of a commercialized robot that was marketed by a startup company here on the University of Illinois campus that's being used to measure plant properties, to identify weeds, using computer vision and autonomous robots. It's being used here to measure the size of corn ears, for breeding better corn seeds, better corn seeds. Here it's being used to identify weeds in the soil. This is just one example of a scale neutral technology in the sense that these are small robots that can be used in small teams or large teams to be able to work on farms at a variety of scales. And this can be used for a number of other practices like mechanical weeding and cover crop planting. But it's not just robots. There are other kinds of scale neutral technologies as well. So computer vision and video-based monitoring, for example, driven by advances in artificial intelligence, can really bring down the cost of monitoring plants for disease and stress, for monitoring livestock for health and better management, for better precision agriculture, for variable rate treatments, because you can look for different outcomes in different parts of a field and really apply variable rate treatments to different parts of a field. All of these can be scaled down to small operations by the use of smaller, more affordable equipment, and combined with AI-driven technologies to support this kind of farming. And this is just one example of using computer vision, for example, to detect different kinds of diseases in rice. And this kind of disease detection using computer vision is now becoming practical. The technology to actually detect this is relatively low cost because the cameras are very inexpensive. The algorithms are sort of one-time investments, and they can be applied to many, many different operations all across a farming region. More broadly, there are many other AI-driven technologies that we think can be low cost and scale neutral. For example, computer vision can be used for disease and stress detection in crops and in both row crops and high value crops. Livestock monitoring for stress detection and behavior prediction, including from unlabeled observed data. measuring plant properties for breeding better quality seeds that are more suitable for different parts of a country or a region. All of this can be driven by computer vision based technologies and models, which can be very low cost and scale neutral. There are a number of other machine learning approaches besides computer vision that also have important applications in agriculture, like sensor-driven precision agriculture for variable rate applications, like improving plant breeding from predicting phenotypes from genes from genetic information, environment, and management, for predicting nutrient flows in soils, and then robotics is a broad area that has a number of different applications in agriculture, including enabling autonomous teams of robots to navigate open fields without human intervention, which is essential for enabling low-cost, scale-neutral applications of robotics, which can then be used for planting cover crops, which is an important approach both for improving soil health, for reducing fertilizer runoff, and also for sequestering carbon. And in fact, carbon credit markets are now starting to look at cover crops in a variety of regions in the world. Using vision-guided weeding management, so mechanical weeding for to avoid fertilizer usage for weeds. I'm sorry, herbicide usage. Harvesting for high-value crops, which is especially a challenge in areas like in the West where labor shortages are becoming acute. This is somewhat less of a problem, I think, in India, but I know that this is becoming, it's increasing to some extent. And so that brings me to the end of my talk. I'll be happy to discuss any of these in more detail. The broad messages I wanted to bring across here are, one, that the judicious use of low-cost and scale-neutral technologies can enable sustainable and profitable and productive agriculture. And moreover, it can enable young people to be motivated to make careers in ag, which is a worldwide problem today. And that, as several of you have said before, Ranjan, Parmesh, Adarsh, all of you have mentioned, the investment today in agriculture and AgTech is really relatively small compared with the size of the markets, and the market opportunity is huge. So there are numerous opportunities for entrepreneurs to build and to take these technologies that are being developed and market them, but really to evaluate which ones are the most profitable in the near term and which ones are the most beneficial long term. And the gap between those may have to be filled with government policy. I will be happy to stop there. I can take questions either now or later as appropriate.
Thank you so much,
Professor
Advait. And I think in terms of, bringing that lens of low cost and, scale neutral, which is so important in our thinking, especially as we look at policy in the future, and really bringing alive, what those possibilities look like. I'm sure has left a lot of people very inspired in terms of the trajectory of innovation that they look at in terms of the future. Thank you so much for being here with us and for sharing your thoughts. Having heard all the various speakers we've had today, I'm sure with Dr. Vaishnav, you've heard a lot of the aspects referring to the innovation ecosystem, whether it was sandbox, whether it was looking at patient capital, whether it was looking at creating the right pipes for startups to be able to look at core agri-tech. It's my privilege to call upon Dr. Vaishnav, Mission Director of the Atal Innovation Mission, to share with us his views on, where do we really go from here and how do we create convergence and scale given the task ahead of us. Dr. Vaishnav, over to you.
Thank you, Meetu. And it's very enlightening to hear all of the various views that are already expressed. And so therefore, I will not really go into views on agriculture per se, but I'd keep it to the innovation ecosystem and its relation to agriculture. And so just in terms of what we do, let me first start by the big picture. So Atal Innovation Mission, as Meetu just mentioned, based at NITI Aayog is the program that is created to nurture and build the innovation ecosystem of India the way, since the word ecosystem gets used in multiple contexts and different people may mean different things by it, I should first define that word as we understand it here. So the one very pithy statement that many of you have probably come across is that when there's a working ecosystem, if somebody can nail it, the ecosystem will scale it. And that's where we're trying to take things. What does that really mean in practice? I think in practice, that means that if we have the necessary actors for the innovation ecosystem, and if their interdependencies are dependable, then I think we have a better working ecosystem. If you look at India's situation, of course, you could ask one other very broad question of when is it that such an ecosystem one can consider is present, and when can the government exit this business of building such an ecosystem? Can it exit the business of building such an ecosystem? One answer to that question is that when innovation begins to be mainstream in any given sector, in that sector, the government can begin to exit. So I think that vision may be whatever, 10 years, 20 years away, but that's the vision here. And I think in agriculture, as has been said today, in agriculture, I think the two important messages that I took away so far. The first one that Sanjeev and Baijal talked about, and I would like to underscore that, is that India is ready. That I can speak a little bit more about why I think India is ready for advancing in the direction that each of you have laid out we should be advancing in. And the second message, which was also mentioned, is that we do need to build acceleration capacity. And I think there, at least from the body like Atal Innovation Mission, I can say that we are ready to build it with you. After this opportunity that CII has created for us to come together, if you would like to reach out and talk about it further and all that, I fully welcome it, or I will reach out to you. I mean, either way. So anyway, so let me just say a little bit about the ecosystem, where it stands as I see it. So from Atal Innovation Mission's point of view, I mean, we know that innovation work in India has been going on for a while. I mean, there was the Department of Science and Technology doing a bunch of incubation, Department of Biotechnology doing a bunch of incubation. Atal Innovation Mission's coming about has been to broad base this ecosystem and begin to integrate it. And I think we've still done, in the last 5 years of AIM, we've done a lot of work on infrastructure. The inflection point is to now take it more strategically to towards an ecosystem. But the infrastructure work, just in case people may or may not have come across this. So we started out by bringing this innovation thinking to schools. So we've built something close to now 9,300 Atal tinkering labs. These are maker spaces in schools. They've created a platform where sort of mind and hands begin to get equal status in learning. In some ways, it is a precursor to at least the 21st century skill pillar of the national education policy that will be rolled out next year. One might say, what has this to do with agriculture? So one interesting observation there is that 70% of these labs are rural, in rural schools. Every day we hear some or the other interesting story. One of my favorite ones is from Jharkhand, where there was a 6th grade girl whose father was an Atal tinkering lab in charge. So this is Yashaswini, the girl, and she going to, back and forth with her father to school, and now getting exposed to these maker spaces, she was passionate about the environmental issues, and was noticing that there are these there's a weed variety resistant to pests, etc., in her village. And so she started to sort of pluck this weed and said to her father she wants to do something with it. And he showed her a process by which she can make pens with it. So she's using these maker spaces to measure precisely, cut and glue and roll and all of that, and make pens out of it. And of course, making a pen is not the point of this, but she has now turned this into a workshop that she teaches in schools around her, as to how to pluck these weeds and make pens out of it, and so on. And I think to me, what was striking about this was that, well, first of all, I think there's such a facility that, like a makerspace, that we hadn't really imagined, is beginning to connect somebody to their passion. That was one thing. Passion about the environment. A lot of these kids have agriculture. So every year we run this tinkering marathon. There are about 10,000 ideas submitted in it, where people we pick a problem in their environment and they work on it for 6 months and produce some solution. These are school kids. And many of these ideas are agriculture related ideas, because they're the problems that they see around them. And so that's very interesting. What was another very striking thing about Yashaswini in particular is that she is physically disabled. So that's we realized obviously there are more people like this who are getting access and doing things. But that's one end of the innovation ecosystem spectrum. Then there's this incubation. You spoke about, a couple of people talked about incubators, and we have about 450 incubators in India, at least. There are some unregistered ones, so we don't know the exact count, but the registered ones, the government supported ones, 450 plus. Out of that, about 68 are created by Atal Innovation Mission. And the ones that Atal created were a more sort of, again, there were some in universities, but then there are some in the industry bodies, civil society organizations, and so on also. And 17 out of these 68 today say that one of their focus areas is agriculture. There are a couple of them that say that they're purely agriculture. One of them is AIC RMP. This is Rambhav Murgi Prabodhini. That is this is Maharashtra. It has partnered with Parli Global to actually offer an immersive program on agriculture-related entrepreneurship to young people who want to do that entrepreneurship. They can work with farmers and so on. So there's what I take, the message I take from this right now is that as this ecosystem advances, there is organically some specialization happening, and one set of that specialization is happening in agriculture. So again, that is definitely a precursor to being able to do acceleration. Now, by the end of this month, we will be producing our first time a book on agri-tech innovations, about 70 of them. And they go across digital, science-based, mechanization, and so there's a variety of them. So again, our idea in publishing this for the first time, actually, in each of the vertical is to begin to show that there is this specialization occurring, and we are going towards that accelerators that we want to build. So, so that's the second piece, the incubation piece. The third piece that I should mention is that we run these things called Atal New India challenges, where ministries, we curate problem statements along with ministries, and they run a national challenge, find solutions, link them to these problems, and then support them for about 18 months to 2 years. Here again, we have both in agriculture and food processing, both ministries have problem statements even this year. And here what's happening is that these problem statements are necessarily in the area of where the market failures are, because that's why the ministry's role is there. And even there, it's fairly competitive. Last time we ran such a challenge, we had 1,000 sort of fairly advanced ideas submitted, and then ultimately 25 of them won at a national level. So, and these were across various sectors, and there were 3 or 4 of them in agriculture and so on. So we have the capability to convene people in this sense, in this ecosystem. That is what I'm trying to say. And so all of this at school level, incubation level, national level, and so on, we have the capability to convene these things. And so again, for the sector, I welcome any conversations about what we need to do next, and formulate whatever it is that should be our next step from the sector's perspective. We are thinking about it, but of course you all are much more steeped into it. So happy to talk about this. I should end by saying that at the highest level for me, if one asks that what is happening through this incubation innovation ecosystem, that is not happening without it, is the answer to that question is, in my mind, the following. I think what's happening through these various 17 incubators, agri-tech focused or whatever, totally we have something like 2,500 startups that are with AIM itself. These are all young people taking risk that the conventional sector, industry, government, etc., is not taking, academia also. So these are young people taking risk, and I think that's what is most exciting about it, because through these young people, our nation is taking that risk that it needs to take. So let me end that. Thanks, Meeta.
Thank you so much, Dr. Vaishnav. And I think that was a call out for all the young entrepreneurs and startups who are on this arduous journey to continue to remain motivated. And we will certainly take you up on your offer of reaching out to you. And I think seeing how more systemically we can engage with the AIM innovation ecosystem, both even in rural India, as you work with the Atal Tinkering Labs, but more so also with some of the other mature startups in this space as well. Thank you so much, Dr. Vaishnav, for being here with us. We now come almost to the end of this session, and I know, Dr. Likhi, we've given you a lot of food for thought, but perhaps kept you away from dinner. But it's really always a joy to have you with us, because you're so thoughtful, and I think your experience in both field and policy formulation across such a wide spectrum always brings a lot of insight to any conversation, and more so in this area, which is so exceedingly important for our country. Over to you, Dr. Likhi, for your remarks. Dr. Likhi, you may want to just unmute. Yeah.
Sorry, Meetu. Thanks, Meetu. Thank you, Puri Saab, for setting the context in the beginning. Thank you, Mr. Baijal, Mr. Ranjan, Mr. Shah, Professor Adve, and Mr. Vaishnav for those erudite and deep dive views. It's been absolutely a learning experience to be present here. Secretary Sanjay Agarwal could not join because of being in Gujarat. It's a pleasure to join, first and foremost. There's no doubt that, as you had Meetu mentioned in the beginning, the role of technological innovations and their actual deployment in the field. This is one of the foremost issues and agendas, flagship programs, or issues before the government of India too. And increasing the income of farmers by addressing the issue of information asymmetry is an objective which we are very closely looking at. And I think, as Parmesh had mentioned, this is being done with a lot of inputs, with a lot of sharing of experiences from the private sector, from the consulting world, Niti Aayog and other stakeholders. Now, two things that have happened in the ministry, and I think all the speakers pinpointed on three things. Number one, the importance of data. Number two, the importance of digitization. And number three, this entire issue about innovation and incubation. Now, one thing is that we've had this National E-Governance Project in Agriculture, NEGPA, for a long time. It has been reformed. It has been changed to provide supports to state governments in new technologies. So to say, the core agri-tech areas of artificial intelligence, blockchain, remote sensing, drones, robots. So they've been included. And I think about 11 states have already been sanctioned pilot projects. The second major initiative, as Puri Saab had mentioned in the beginning, is this building of the AgriStack based on the National Farmers Database, a federated database of farmers. Now, the good news is that we are already through with details of around 5 crore farmers. I mean, you know, the task at hand is huge. The stakeholders involved are quite a many. And for the government to do it all, it has to be with the help of stakeholders. So this data has been cross-checked with, land records, whether it is data for the PM Kisan DBT program or the soil health program or the insurance program. We're in the process of sort of putting this in process. There is a timeline to it. But the interesting thing is we are collaborating both with the private and public sector entities. And a lot of proof of concepts are being created. For instance, selecting 100 villages in 10 districts. And we have Microsoft, Amazon, Organic Research Institute, ESRI, AgriBazaar, NinjaCart, a lot of people to help us to take us through. But at the end of creating such a database and then looking at all the digital aspects of it, or looking at the still broader aspect of incubation and innovation, I think convergence is very important, because we may have an agri infrastructure fund, which is the future in terms of creating access to finance, or the idea of having 10,000 FPOs, or looking at natural farming, which is the focus of discussion in the pre-Vibrant Gujarat Summit the next 2 days. The ultimate issue is convergence. The ultimate issue is how this federated database feeds into all the programs, projects, and schemes that the ministry runs. Agriculture is a state subject. A lot of action happens at the state government level. I have served as Principal Secretary Agriculture. And so Government of India can only do it by way of collaboration, by way of partnerships. I think a lot has been said about all these issues by very eminent speakers. I have learned so much from them. I would just like to highlight one point, and which is a field implementation issue. Ultimately, with the district as the unit of administration in our country, we have a whole lot of district administrative officials at the block level, at the village level, within panchayats, who will have to be hands-on with these technologies that we are talking of. At times, it seems we use a lot of jargon, but these are the guys in the field who will ultimately have to handle them and, so to say, interact with the farmer. So what becomes most important for me as a policymaker is the element of skill by way of capacity building. I think a lot of investment has to go into this element, other than creating a federated database, because ultimately that's what is going to get implemented at the last mile. With that thought, I will stop. And I think I'll take these thoughts back to the ministry, and we'll definitely dovetail them into our policy framework. I have all the emails with me. I would wish and also make a request that all the eminent speakers that we have on the panel here today, we will get in touch with them. We will take them views on record, and with a very open mind, try and see how we can sort of strengthen this federated database that we are working upon. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Likhi. You have always left us with a systemic way of looking at things. So both, collaboration, convergence, and capacity, the 3 C's that we will need to be able to really build on, as we look at our policy. Thank you so much for your remarks. I'm going to now invite Mr. Sanjeev Puri to make his concluding remarks at this session.
Thank you, Meetu. And I would like to thank all the eminent speakers for this very insightful discussion. It's been a very enlightening session, and we've had an array of perspectives come in, perspectives on the challenges, the opportunities, the execution issues that emanate in the field, the issue of financing, the need to create accelerators, so wide array of issues, and then the kind of deep academic research that is being done in the universities. So very insightful session indeed, very thought-provoking. So I'd like to thank all of you for your valuable comments. And in particular, Dr. Likhi, thank you very much for this very encouraging perspective on collaboration, and a very important perspective on the last mile execution. That is where the when the rubber hits the road, that's where the challenges come. And capacity building, not only at the farmer level, but equally at the people who are the administration that is going to enable that to happen. So it's a large problem. We take that message, and we in CII are quite committed to making a contribution to transforming agriculture. We have an initiative around FPOs. We also have NAVI, which is bringing all these startups and all the ecosystem together. And we are, as you're aware, we continue to collaborate with the ministry, and we will continue to do that and see and enhance the role that the private sector can place in transforming agriculture. I would also like to thank all the other speakers once again for all the insightful thoughts. I'm going to stop here. I know it's rather late, so I will not come in between you and whatever the next engagement or dinner is. Thank you very much, and we look forward to being in touch and collaborating with all of you. Thank you. Good day and good night.
Thank you very much. Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Night,